You know, I like thinking, writing, and talking about Pokémon Go. Maybe I should try making some content for it and... Well then, I was not expecting that. But people seem to really enjoy these videos, and lots of you have left really helpful, keenly insightful comments. So I just wanted to say, thank you. I don't exactly know what I'm doing with this whole YouTube thing, but maybe we can build a neat little Pokémon Go community, right here, from the ground up. So keep leaving those comments, click that subscribe button if you haven't, and stay tuned for more info. This has been one of the more interesting times in Pokémon Go's history. With the official announcement that Niantic has sold the game to Scopely, reactions to this news have been mostly level-headed. But in all that chaos, something else happened this week that got me thinking about the future of this game. Code was recently data mined that indicates a new feature coming to Pokémon Go. The ability to raise a Pokémon's IVs, similar to bottle caps which were introduced in Pokémon Sun and Moon, that would allow players to raise one of their Pokémon's IVs. There were also gold bottle caps which could be used to max out all of your Pokémon's IVs. And although it's too early to say for certain, this matches with what was found in the code. However it's implemented, it's an exciting new feature for many players. Have a 98% shiny Pokemon that's excruciatingly close to being a Shundo? Well, now it can be, or will be. Let me know in the comments which Pokemon you plan to use it on first. But seeing the teasing of this new feature got me wondering, what else is out there? What other features from the main series games could potentially be added to Pokemon Go? What would they look like? Are they even possible? So in this video, I'm going to consider what it would mean to theoretically add one feature from each generation of Pokemon games to Pokemon Go. Generation 1 is probably the easiest because, well, with it being the first in the series, anything in it that isn't already in Pokemon Go would fit the criteria. I thought about adding the move Explosion, just because it would be hilarious to see, either in raids or PvP. Imagine doing a raid with 10 people and dropping a nuke that takes out everyone. But instead of trolling, I decided to choose turn-based battling. Hidden in plain sight, a staple from the very beginning, but also something we've never had in Pokemon Go, as the developers instead implemented the Tappa 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 PvP format. As for how this could be implemented in Pokemon Go, well, there are challenges. The first one being that it would be an absolute nightmare for the game's spaghetti code. Think about how frequently we've encountered PvP issues from the moment it was implemented, and now imagine it in a new and probably more complex system. Secondly, a turn-based PvP system on your mobile device would soon become redundant, as the Pokémon Company recently announced the development of Pokémon Champions, which is expected to release on both Switch consoles and mobile devices in the near future. So while turn-based battles in Pokemon Go might be interesting, given the stat builds and move pools, the lack of need for it coupled with the nightmare it presents for the devs means that I would say there is almost a 0% chance of it ever happening to the game. Not off to a good start, I know. On to Generation 2, and man, I would love to see some kind of mechanic utilizing hazards. I know, how, but it would be amazing to hurl out some spikes against the constant switchers in PvP. But for Gen 2, I'm going to go with breeding. A staple since the days of Pokemon Gold and Silver, breeding is a process by which you leave two Pokemon at a Pokemon daycare, some stuff happens, and then somehow there's an egg for you to hatch. Interestingly, if the two Pokemon have the same defense stat, they wouldn't produce an egg because this indicated that they were related. So, thanks Pokemon. I don't think any of us were thinking about Pokemon incest, but now we all are. Anyway, what would implementing breeding mean in Pokemon Go? Well, I personally think that it would be an absolute game changer, simply because it would give players the ability to choose what Pokemon they hatch. Want to shiny hunt or hundo hunt a particular Pokemon, hatching egg after egg until you get one? Now you can! It would mean not being handcuffed to whatever egg pool the game throws at you. And if there's an event going on with eggs you actually want to hatch, you can take a break from breeding and load up on them. As for what it would mean to implement, I also don't think it would be that hard, since all it would take would be to add daycare centers that could operate similar to how Power Stops already do. Go there, leave your Pokemon, and they can return to you after a period of time with an egg. This would be a huge improvement for the game, wouldn't require a ton of effort from the devs, and without much of a downside, unless you consider selling more incubators to be a bad thing. So I'm going to say there should hopefully be a decent chance of this happening someday. On to Generation 3, and while Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire are my personal favorite games in the series, and while they revolutionized how the game is played competitively by introducing both natures and abilities, the reality is that these would be a logistical nightmare to Pokémon Go. A Pokémon's nature affects raised and lowered stats. Now imagine how stats are already affected by things like the raid floor, the egg floor, the lucky floor, being weather boosted, and so on. In short, I think that Pokémon Go's design means coupling nature to that train would make for a disaster. And things aren't that much better with my actual choice for Gen 3, abilities. Starting in Generation 3, each Pokemon you encountered had one of two abilities. The problem is that most of these abilities pertain to many things that are not present in Pokemon Go, like being poisoned, paralyzed, flinching, accuracy drops, or crits. There are a few that would make for fun additions to PvP or raid battles, such as changes to your attack, defense, or that of your opponent. Like imagine someone using a Pokemon with the ability Intimidate, which lowers your opponent's attack when sent into battle, or the ability Inner Focus, which prevents that from happening, or something like Arena Trap, which prevents opponents from switching out Pokemon. While tricky, I think slowly implementing these could be a ton of fun, and add a great addition to battling, but I would classify the odds of this ever happening as extremely doubtful. On to Generation 4, and for Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, I am not even going to entertain any other notions for what to implement, since the best one is so blatantly obvious: the Masuda method. The Masuda method, named after Pokemon developer Junichi Masuda, is a method for hunting shinies implemented in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl using the global trade system, which allowed players to send and receive Pokemon from around the world by connecting their DSs to the Nintendo Wi-Fi network. Breeding two Pokemon from different language versions of the game would produce eggs that were 5 times more likely to be shiny than normal. This was done by the developers to continue encouraging more global Pokemon trading. Now, this seems like a feature that was made for Pokemon Go. What with there already being an easy way to get Pokemon from other countries via remote raids or gift exchange. It doesn't seem to me to represent a major challenge to implement, but rather the challenge would come in, well, the shiny boost would be insane. If a full odds shiny in Pokemon Go is 1 in 512, being 5 times more likely would make it just 1 in 16. So they would probably want to tone that down. As to how it could be implemented, I think it would probably be a good idea to introduce it via some sort of event that includes Ditto in 7-kilometer eggs. Let me explain. Ditto is the Pokemon most often used to shiny hunt with the Masuda method, since it can breed with anything. So players interested in using it could swap their Dittos for foreign Dittos and get to breeding. Ugh, that really doesn't sound right. Anyway, since this would involve already having breeding, which already isn't in the game, I'd say the odds of us ever seeing the Masuda method in Pokemon Go are somewhere less than those odds. On to the black and white era of Generation 5, and we have quite a few things to choose from here. There are gems, which correspond to every Pokemon type, and when held will boost the power of corresponding moves. There are hidden abilities, which are like regular abilities but are not guaranteed, and you know what, we don't even have abilities, so let's not get into that. So for me, there is one clear choice for mechanics introduced in Gen 5, and I think you'll all agree with my choice. The Shiny Charm. The Shiny Charm is an item obtained by the player in the post-game that increases the odds of encountering a shiny by re-rolling its values 2 additional times. So in essence, for every Pokemon encounter, the player has not 1, not 2, but 3 chances for it to be shiny, thus lowering the base shiny rate from 1 in 8,192 to 1 in 2,731. So let's talk about if this were implemented in Pokemon Go, because just as with the Masuda method, there's some issues. If the base shiny rate is 1 in 512, a shiny charm would drop it all the way down to 1 in 128, which I highly doubt would ever happen. The other problem is that in Generation 5 and every iteration thereafter, the shiny charm is given to the player as a reward for completing the game's Pokédex. So how do you implement that in a game where that isn't even possible? Where there is, and by the nature of the game always will be, unreleased Pokemon. Maybe they could do something where each region of Pokemon has its own shiny charm, and completing each Pokédex increases the odds of encountering shinies from just that region. But that would be brand new content, which is even more unlikely. Maybe something akin to the mechanic in Pokemon Legends Arceus, where completing research on each Pokemon makes it more likely to encounter a shiny. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on this enigma, but I put the shiny charm ever seeing Pokemon Go as mostly doubtful. On to Generation 6, where things start to get interesting because it is technically the generation Pokémon Go itself resides in. And you see this reflected in how some of the new features mirror features found in Pokémon Go. Pokémon X and Y introduced Horde encounters, where a player can encounter up to 5 of the same species of wild Pokémon. In Pokémon Go, we have nests, which contain many of the same species of Pokémon and rotate over a period of time. Not exactly the same, I know. Also, I've always wished Niantic did more with nests, but that's for another video. There's also Super Training, wherein you can raise your Pokémon's EVs, which we don't really have in Pokémon Go. But you can kind of see it reflected in the mechanics for reaching Best Buddy with your Pokémon. So if I had to choose something new from Generation 6, I'm going to go with something that is only found in Generation 6. Inverse Battles. In Inverse Battles, all type effectiveness is essentially reversed. So for example, instead of water being effective against fire, it's now weak to it. Psychic is now weak to fighting. Ice is now weak to dragon, and so on. I don't know, I think it'd be cool to encounter inverse rocket trainers and work backwards to defeat them. Or even as a special cup in the PvP, where you see the same dozen or so Pokemon over and over, and have the meta shaken up. But given how obscure it is and the coding challenges involved, I'd say the chances of this ever happening are in the vicinity of 0. On to Generation 7 and Pokémon Sun and Moon, where bottle caps would be the easy choice were it not for them already probably being on the horizon. The most notable feature in Pokémon Sun and Moon is that there aren't any gyms or gym leaders, but instead islands where you fight the island champion. These battles culminate with you fighting a totem Pokémon, which are just really strong, really large Pokémon. None of which signaled something new to implement in Pokémon Go since we already have XL, XXL, and even Mighty Pokémon. So instead, I'm going to go with another main mechanic of Sun and Moon, Z-moves. In short, Z-moves are ultra-powerful moves that can be used once per battle, provided the trainer is wearing a Z-ring equipped with a corresponding crystal. I could see Z-moves as being fairly useful in dropping a tactical nuke in raids, something really helpful for players in rural communities that have a hard time filling out raid lobbies. I think this is a mechanic that may have already been brought to Pokémon Go, if not for the timing of the game's history. Many of the new features we see correspond to something else happening in the world of Pokémon. And with Pokémon Sun and Moon having been released just after the release of Pokémon Go, and there not yet being any nostalgia for a remake, I classify it as something that could one day drop in the future, maybe when it's remade or for the Alolan Tour. On to Generation 8. The Galar region, and the post-handheld Switch era. And for me, there is absolutely, positively no question what I would want to see in Pokémon Go. In the Crown Tundra Pokémon Sword and Shield DLC, you can take on Dynamax Adventures, and battle your way through 4 Pokémon, the last of which being a legendary. When finished, you could select one of the Pokémon you caught to keep. The shiny odds for these raids were much better than wild encounters at 1 in 200. But Raiden, we already have raids, we already have legendaries, and the shiny odds in legendary raids are already better. So why implement it? Well, the part I want to implement is that joining a raid is as simple as joining a lobby, made up of players from around the world whenever you want. No campfire, no adding friends on the Pokémon Go Friends subreddit, just join a lobby in the game, wait for players, play. Easy. If by some absurd notion the people at Scopely are listening, do this. Do this as soon as you can. Tear down the walls separating players from the game and let us just buy and use our raid passes how we want. Mic drop. Wait, I wasn't supposed to say that out loud. Finally, Generation 9, where our journey ends in the wonderful world of Paldea, a place of sandwiches, overly melodramatic side quests, and this thing. Now, obviously the new hotness in Pokémon Scarlet Violet is terastallization, but we all know we're going to get that at some point anyway. So instead, I'm going to go with Overworld Shinies. Ugh, just imagine. You're at the park, it's community day, there's 50 Quaxley all around you, and instead of having to tap on each one, you just know which one is shiny. Can you imagine? Now, because Pokemon fans are so passionate, this is where someone will point out that technically Overworld Shiny started in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which is technically Generation 7. But see, I was only counting when things premiered in the main series games, so please don't hurt me. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to join our budding little community, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to check out something else I create, there's a link in the description to one of the comics I made, which you're free to enjoy with my compliments. Thank you again, and as always, stay safe out there, trainers.